We are taught that the grandest holy site in history was built by the hands of pious men, a monument of pure divine light. But what if the mortar holding those sacred stones together was mixed in the darkest pits of the underworld? The historical and mythological legacy of King Solomon is defined by a profound and enduring paradox. Within Orthodox scriptural traditions, he is venerated as the paragon of divine wisdom, the sovereign who unified the kingdom of Israel and the architect of the first temple in Jerusalem. This sanctuary was designed to house the Ark of the Covenant and serve as the physical locus of the divine presence on earth. However, running parallel to this canonical narrative is a vast, shadowy tradition of esoteric lore that positions Solomon not merely as a pious monarch, but as the supreme master of the occult arts. This esoteric corpus suggests that the grandeur of the first temple was achieved not through human masonry alone, but through the systematic subjugation of infernal forces. According to these ancient legends, Solomon bound, interrogated, and commanded a vast legion of demons, utilizing their supernatural strength, metallurgical expertise, and forbidden knowledge to erect the sanctuary of Yahweh. The integration of demonic labor into the construction of a holy edifice introduces a profound theological and metaphysical tension. It asserts a cosmological framework wherein divine authority is absolute, capable of bending even the most malevolent entities to the will of heaven to serve a sacred purpose. Over millennia, this narrative evolved from Hellenistic Jewish folklore into the foundational bedrock of Western ceremonial magic, culminating in complex medieval and early modern grimoires such as the Lemegeton, or the Lesser Key of Solomon, and its infamous catalogue of spirits, the Ars Goetia. An exhaustive analysis of these occult secrets reveals a complex interweaving of Babylonian, Persian, Greek, and Judeo-Christian thought. This synthesis exposes the hidden architectural and spiritual dimensions of the temple, the containment of the 72 Goetic demons in the mythical brass vessel, the strict taxonomy of infernal hierarchies, and the enduring psychological architecture of Solomonic magic. The earliest comprehensive articulation of Solomon as a demonological architect is found in the Testament of Solomon, a pseudepigraphical composite text composed in Greek between the 1st and 5th centuries of the Common Era. Blending Egyptian, Greek, Jewish, and early Christian spiritual ideas, the text is structured as a deathbed confession and functions simultaneously as a legendary biography, a demonological encyclopedia, and a proto-grimoire. The Testament explicitly details how the Temple of Jerusalem was built through the coerced labor of spirits of the air, the earth, and the underworld. The narrative is catalyzed by an incident involving a young artisan working on the temple, who is plagued by a vampire spirit named Orneus. This demon systematically steals half of the boy's daily wages and food, subsequently draining his life force through his right thumb. Distressed by the boy's affliction and the disruption of the holy construction, Solomon prays for divine intervention and is visited by the Archangel Michael. The Archangel bestows upon the king a magical ring set with a stone engraved with a pentalpha, a pentagram or hexagram, that would later become universally known as the Seal of Solomon, declaring that it will grant the monarch absolute dominion over all demons. Armed with this divine talisman, Solomon embarks on a systematic campaign of demonic subjugation. He first commands Orneus to hew massive stones for the temple's foundation, forcing the vampire spirit to transition from a predator into a quarry laborer. But that was only the beginning of a much darker architectural endeavor, as the king's gaze turned toward the prince of demons himself. Orneus is broken, transitioning from a terrifying nighttime predator into a lowly quarry laborer under the crushing weight of divine authority. But Solomon knows he needs a deeper, far more ancient power to complete his impossible vision. He commands the shivering vampire spirit to deliver the very prince of demons, Beelzebul, also known to the ancients as Beelzebub. The air in the throne room turns freezing cold as the entity materializes from the shadows. Beelzebul, arrogant yet bound by the terrifying, blinding light of the Archangel Michael's ring, testifies that he alone survived of the angels who had come down from heaven, now reigning over all who are chained in the dark, suffocating abyss of Tartarus. Compelled by the celestial seal, the Dark Prince is forced into absolute submission, ordered to parade his infernal subjects before the mortal king for strict evaluation. Solomon sits in absolute judgment on his throne, interrogating each nightmare, forcing them to peel back their illusions and reveal their true names, their astrological affiliations, the sickening maladies they cause in the mortal realm, and the specific angelic forces that possess the power to thwart them. This excruciating, systematic interrogation becomes a vital cataloging mechanism, a living encyclopedia of terror that would form the very basis for later medical alchemy and exorcism rites. The royal chamber transforms into a menagerie of syncretic nightmares, drawn from the surrounding Mediterranean and Near Eastern cultures. Beelzebul brings forth Onoskelis, a deceptive demon hiding behind the skin of a fair-hued woman, radiating a terrible, cold beauty that masks her true nature. Next comes Asmodeus, the suffocating demon of lust, and Tephros, the demon of ashes, filling the chamber with a dry, choking scent of burning graves. The shadows twist and birth a headless demon possessing all the muscular limbs of a man. This abomination identifies himself as Envy, his hollow voice echoing from his chest, claiming he delights in nothing more than devouring human heads. Further reflecting the deep integration of Greek mythology into this dark tapestry, Solomon binds Obizuth, a horrifying female demon with no limbs and a massive head full of writhing, disheveled hair, widely interpreted as a grotesque representation of Medusa or a Gorgon. The parade of horrors continues with the demon Enepsigos, who recounts to the Stoic king that he can take 3 entirely different physical forms, including the massive, world-breaking Greek titan, Kronos. This fluid entity is also represented as a triple-faced woman, akin to the dark goddess Hecate, an entity astrologically associated with the cold, pulling sphere of the moon. With the legions identified and bound by celestial mathematics, the division of labor begins, highly specialized and reflecting an advanced, albeit supernatural, architectural operation designed to construct a monument of unprecedented scale. Certain groups of these wretched spirits were condemned specifically to execute the absolute heaviest, most bone-crushing labor required for the holy temple. Demons such as Orneus were assigned the grueling, endless task of cutting massive, unyielding stone blocks sourced from the distant, scorching shores of the Sea of Arabia. Deep within the construction trenches, the air grew thick with toxic fumes, as other demons were ordered to wrestle directly with roaring fire to smelt gold and silver. These hellish entities sat by blinding rivers of molten lead, their unnatural flesh blistering as they operated the massive crucibles necessary for the temple's vast and intricate ornamental wealth. As the colossal structure rose toward the heavens, specific engineering challenges were met with highly specialized, violent, demonic interventions. Enter Ephipus, a destructive, howling wind demon whose hot, diseased breath had once devastated the entire land of Arabia. Solomon trapped this roaring entity in a fragile flask, bending its chaotic tempest into concentrated kinetic force. Ephipus was subsequently deployed to raise the massive headstone of the corner into its impossible resting place. This specific cornerstone was so dense, so terrifyingly massive, that the greatest human engineers and workmen had entirely abandoned it in despair. But the bound wind demon moved it effortlessly through the air. Furthermore, a terrifying spirit of the Red Sea, named Abezithibod, the dark offspring of Beelzebul, was forced to assist Ephipus in dredging up an enormous, ancient column from the crushing, lightless depths of the ocean. The ancient text notes that this colossal pillar was suspended in mid-air within the holy temple, supported perpetually by the unseen, trembling, bound hands of these two ancient spirits. The mastery of the occult architect extended even into the earth and the stars above. Another terrifying, hound-like spirit, named Rabdos, was coerced under the threat of celestial fire into revealing the hidden subterranean location of a rare, glowing green stone used for the sanctuary's final adornment. To ensure the temple maintained absolute dominance over the cosmic and astrological order, Solomon reached into the very heavens and imprisoned the 36 Stoicheia, the ancient world rulers of darkness and decani of the zodiacal signs, setting them to work like common slaves within the holy precincts. The Testament frames Solomon's unprecedented architectural triumph not merely as a physical feat of engineering, but as a total cosmic victory. By binding the primeval forces of chaos, disease, and darkness into the structured, mathematical geometry of a holy sanctuary, Solomon achieved a terrifying synthesis of divine will and earthly dominion. However, this text also serves as a chilling, moral cautionary tale. The narrative notes that Solomon ultimately fell from his towering pinnacle of grace, seduced by his lust for foreign women, specifically a Shunammite woman. This catastrophic failure of his iron will led the great and wise king to sacrifice to the bloodthirsty god Moloch, and build profane temples for Baal and Raphan, fracturing his divine mandate and resulting in the eventual devastating loss of his protective occult powers. But long before his tragic fall, the Babylonian Jewish traditions tell an even stranger, more cautious tale of how the temple stones were truly cut without the taint of iron. A tale involving an intoxicated demon king and a miraculous supernatural worm. While the Hellenistic traditions celebrated Solomon's iron-fisted demonic subjugation, the Babylonian Jewish tradition viewed the construction of the most sacred site in Judaism with profound theological caution. The very idea that the physical resting place of the Ark of the Covenant was erected by unholy, impure entities created an intense, almost unbearable religious friction among the ancient scholars. This overwhelming tension is masterfully negotiated and subverted in the Babylonian Talmud, specifically within Tractate Gittin, which presents a highly complex narrative involving Solomon, the terrifying demon king Ashmedai, and a miraculous entity known simply as the Shamir. In this ancient account, the great king is faced with a strict, unbreakable biblical prohibition. He must build the magnificent temple without the use of a single iron tool, because iron is intrinsically associated with the brutal violence of warfare, weaponry, and bloodshed, rendering it entirely unfit to ever touch the pure stones of a house of peace. To perfectly cut the massive, unyielding foundation stones without the violent din of hammers, he desperately requires the Shamir, a miraculous, rock-splitting worm or supernatural substance forged by God himself during the fading twilight of the sixth day of creation. Because the whereabouts of this primordial cutter are lost to human knowledge, Solomon captures ordinary, lesser demons, binding them in chains and interrogating them ruthlessly in the flickering shadows of his throne room. The lesser entities screech and profess their total ignorance, but under the crushing weight of the king's magical authority, they point trembling fingers toward their sovereign lord, Ashmedai, who resides in absolute isolation deep within a lightless pit on the freezing peak of a distant, towering mountain. Knowing the immense, ancient power of this demon king, Solomon does not send an army, but instead dispatches his foremost general, the cunning Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, to capture the infernal monarch. General Benaiah knows that a direct assault would end in immediate slaughter, for Ashmedai is no mindless beast. The demon king drinks only pure rainwater from a very specific, remote well, meticulously sealing it with his own dark magic to detect even the slightest human tampering. Utilizing extreme cunning over brute force, Benaiah creeps up the desolate mountain under the cover of darkness and drills a silent hole deep beneath the well to drain the pure water away, plugging it tightly before drilling a second hole from above. Through this upper conduit, the human general pours gallons upon gallons of thick, potent, fortified wine, turning the demon's pristine water source into a trap of intoxicating poison. When the massive, terrifying figure of Ashmedai descends from his pit to quench his thirst, he unwittingly gorges himself on the corrupted liquid, soon crashing into the dirt in a heavy, inescapable, drunken stupor. Emerged from the shadows, Benaiah strikes, wrapping the unconscious demon king in a cold, heavy, magical chain and forcing a ring onto his massive finger, both artifacts glowing with the deeply engraved, ineffable name of God. Dragged in heavy chains back to the golden city of Jerusalem and forced to his knees before Solomon, a furious but bound Ashmedai is compelled to reveal the ultimate secret of the earth. He confesses that the Shamir was not hoarded within the demonic realm at all, but was entrusted by the ancient prince of the sea to a simple woodcock or hoopoe bird, a creature that uses the supernatural worm to silently split barren rocks and plant seeds in the most desolate wastelands. Following this extorted intelligence, Solomon's elite soldiers scour the wilderness and finally locate the bird's fragile nest. They do not destroy it, but rather place a heavy glass dome perfectly over the nest, trapping the helpless young inside. When the frantic mother bird returns, she is forced to bring the Shamir, laying the radioactive, rock-splitting worm against the glass to cut through and save her offspring. In that very moment, Benaiah leaps from the brush, startling the creature and causing it to drop the priceless Shamir, which is instantly secured by the waiting Israelites. With this divine silent cutter in hand, Solomon effortlessly carves the massive temple stones with absolute mathematical perfection, completely avoiding the violent din of iron hammers and the spiritual taint of demonic labor. By utilizing the Shamir to cut the stones, Solomon avoided using demonic labor for the actual construction, thereby preserving the purity of the sanctuary, while still demonstrating his unparalleled earthly mastery by capturing and subduing the king of the demonic realm. Yet this magnificent triumph over the infernal realm carries a terrifying, deeply psychological cost. The Talmudic narrative concludes not with a grand celebration of masonry, but with a stark, chilling warning about the fatal dangers of occult hubris. Despite being heavily bound in divine chains within the king's own palace, the captive Ashmedai stares into the eyes of his captor and issues a dangerous psychological challenge. He softly questions the true extent of the king's intrinsic power, mocking the great Solomon by asking if his legendary authority relies entirely on a simple metal ring and a magical chain. In a moment of catastrophic, ego-driven foolishness, Solomon removes his divine ring and hands it directly to the smiling demon to prove his own inherent human strength. In a fraction of a second, the illusion of control shatters completely. Ashmedai instantly snaps his unbreakable chains like brittle twigs, swallows the magical ring whole, and with a roar that shakes the foundations of reality, hurls the mortal king 400 parasangs into the desolate exile of the wilderness. The towering demon king then seamlessly shapeshifts, morphing his grotesque features to assume the king's exact physical identity, stepping up to the golden throne to rule in absolute disguise over Jerusalem, while the true, humiliated Solomon wanders the dusty roads as a forgotten beggar. This terrifying usurpation underscores the incredibly precarious nature of trafficking with infernal forces, proving that the very entities Solomon sought to interrogate and bind ultimately displaced him. It is a chilling reminder that the unchecked pursuit of forbidden knowledge inevitably leads to ruin. But as the false king ruled above in the sunlight, the true, dark secrets of Solomon's grand design were being buried deep beneath the earth, locked in architectural geometries designed to hold back the primeval abyss itself. The narrative of the great king controlling the legions of hell is inextricably linked to the physical, suffocating geography of the temple itself. As you step past the threshold, you do not merely enter a building of stone and cedar, but rather you step inside a massive, vibrating geometric talisman designed to fiercely channel divine energy and trap esoteric secrets. Built according to ancient Phoenician design principles, every inch of the sanctuary was a deliberate, calculating metaphysical trap, adorned with intricate carvings of cherubim, palm trees, and blooming flowers that were entirely, blindingly overlaid with pure gold. But the true, terrifying power of the structure did not lie in the gleaming courtyards bathed in sunlight. It lay in the absolute, pitch-black epicenter of the temple's spiritual power, the even Hashatia, or the foundation stone. Situated deep within the windowless, breathless darkness of the Holy of Holies, this rough bedrock outcropping was the physical resting place of the golden Ark of the Covenant. In the whispered Kabbalistic and Talmudic traditions, this jagged stone is recognized as the axis mundi, the cosmic navel, and the original primordial substance from which God expanded the earth during the 6 days of creation. Esoteric traditions postulate that the stone acts as a heavy primordial seal, a divine cap resting precariously over the chaotic, roaring subterranean waters of the abyss known as the Tehom. It stands as the only barrier preventing those dark waters from surging upward to completely flood and devour the mortal world. In the context of Solomonic demonology, this foundation stone represents the ultimate, terrifying locus of binding, a geological manifestation of the supreme divine authority that allowed the king to suppress the chaotic, infernal elements utilized during the temple's bloody construction. Surrounding this dark sanctuary were extensive physical features carrying deep, ominous, occult significance. The towering entrance was flanked by two massive, shadow-casting bronze pillars named Yakin and Boaz. Esoteric traditions interpret these colossal monoliths as ancient symbols of the establishment and strength of the divine kingdom, representing the towering dualistic pillars of severity and mercy in the Kabbalistic tree of life. Out in the sun-baked outer courtyards stood the molten sea, an enormous, terrifyingly heavy brazen vessel resting on the arched backs of 12 bronze oxen, meticulously crafted from the looted brass Solomon had taken from the captured burning cities of Hadadezer, king of Zobah. Accompanying this sea of brass were 10 mobile bronze lavers on wheels, standing over 3 meters high and adorned with the roaring faces of lions and cherubim, utilized daily for the bloody, necessary cleansing of endless animal sacrifices. Yet beneath the visible, golden grandeur of the temple, ancient legends, reinforced by modern archaeological discoveries in Jerusalem and the weathered texts of the Qumran copper scroll, posit the existence of a dark, subterranean network of hidden chambers and vaults. These lightless corridors were designed to store vast treasures, holy vessels, and forbidden texts far from the eyes of common men. In the highest, most secretive degrees of Freemasonry, specifically the Order of Royal and Select Masters, they vigorously preserve the chilling legend of the secret vault. According to this hushed tradition, King Solomon, Hiram, king of Tyre, and the doomed chief architect Hiram Abiff constructed a labyrinthine underground sanctuary consisting of 9 interconnected arches, plunging deep into the earth and terminating directly beneath the Sanctum Sanctorum. This suffocating vault was built to preserve the most sacred treasures and esoteric knowledge, specifically the lost word representing the true, vibrating name of God, protecting it from impending apocalyptic geopolitical destruction. The construction of this subterranean vault was a masterpiece of paranoia and absolute secrecy. 22 exhausted men from Gebel, alongside Ahishar and Adoniram, labored exclusively in the dead of night, swinging their picks and moving massive stones from 9 at night until the stroke of midnight. The air in the tunnels was thick with the smoke of sputtering torches and the sweat of desperate men, ensuring that prying, jealous eyes never witnessed the impossible subterranean engineering. This vault serves as a powerful, enduring metaphor for the preservation of forbidden knowledge beneath the pristine surface of Orthodox religion. A dark library guarded by the very architectural foundations laid by Solomon himself. But as the final stones were set and the temple was completed, the great king faced a critical, terrifying existential dilemma regarding the vast, seething army of spirits he had congregated in the golden city of Jerusalem. He stood upon his balcony, looking out over the city, knowing the perpetual apocalyptic threat these demons posed to frail humanity if left unchecked or unmanaged. He could not simply banish them back to the underworld, for they knew the paths to the surface now, and they hungered for human suffering. Instead, the occult architect engineered a mass permanent containment system, a prison built not of stone, but of magic and metallurgy. According to the dark traditions codified in the Ars Goetia and heavily mirrored in ancient Arabic folklore, Solomon commanded the 72 chief spirits, along with their respective millions of screeching subordinate legions, into a massive, inescapable brass vessel. The choice of brass was highly significant in ancient metallurgy and magical correspondences, a metal associated with violent binding, martial strength, and the planetary influences of Venus and Jupiter, forging an impenetrable metaphysical barrier against the furious spiritual entities screaming within. But a vessel is only as strong as its lid, and Solomon knew he would need to forge a seal so powerful that even the kings of hell would break their teeth trying to shatter it. The great king stood victorious within his golden sanctuary, yet a creeping, suffocating dread filled the royal halls as he faced a critical, existential dilemma regarding the vast, seething army of spirits he had congregated in Jerusalem. Millions of shrieking infernal entities, led by the 72 chief spirits, now festered within the holy city, and Solomon recognized the perpetual apocalyptic threat they posed to frail humanity if left unchecked or unmanaged. He knew he could not simply banish them back to the dark underworld, for they had tasted the surface and would forever hunger for human suffering. Instead, the occult architect engineered a mass, permanent containment system, a prison built not of stone, but of heavy, unyielding metal. According to the dark traditions codified in the Ars Goetia and heavily mirrored in ancient Arabic folklore, he commanded the 72 princes, along with their respective millions of subordinate legions, to march into a massive, inescapable brass vessel. The choice of brass was no accident. In the ancient arts of metallurgy and magical correspondence, brass vibrates with the heavy energy of violent binding and martial strength. Aligned with the planetary influences of Venus and Jupiter, this dense metallic alloy created an impenetrable metaphysical barrier, suffocating the dark spiritual entities writhing within. But a vessel is only as strong as its lid, and to ensure the nightmare was truly contained, Solomon sealed the opening with a talisman so terrifyingly specific that the forces of hell could not even scratch its surface, an artifact known as the secret seal of Solomon. The creation of this secret seal was an agonizing, elaborate ceremonial operation, fundamentally distinct from the simple pentagram ring bestowed by the Archangel Michael. The Lesser Key of Solomon specifies a ritual of extreme, punishing purification, demanding that the royal magician completely cleanse his mortal flesh by entirely abstaining from all sexual activity for a full, agonizing month. He was required to engage in rigorous starvation-level fasting and breathless prayer, begging for total forgiveness from the divine. When his body was hollowed out and pure, the physical seal was meticulously drawn on flawless virgin parchment. But common ink will not hold the devil. The geometric lines were traced using the hot, fresh blood of a jet-black rooster that had never mated. The timing of this dark arithmetic was astronomically strict, demanding the ritual be executed precisely at the stroke of midnight. He was forced to wait for a Tuesday, governed by the aggressive, martial suppression of Mars, or a Saturday, governed by the cold, severe limitation and permanent containment of Saturn. All the while, the pale moon had to be waxing in the rigid zodiacal sign of Virgo. Finally, as the bloody sigil dried into the skin, the parchment was heavily fumigated in a choking, fragrant cloud of alum, sun-dried raisins, dark dates, crushed cedar, and bitter lignum aloe, permanently cementing its raw occult power and sealing the demons in complete darkness. With the 72 demonic princes and their millions of thrashing subjects sealed within the dark, suffocating belly of the brass vessel, Solomon lifted the impossibly heavy container and cast it away into the abyss. He threw it deep into a dark, suffocating body of water, burying the screaming nightmare far from the fragile interference of mortal hands. Esoteric traditions whisper varying coordinates for this watery grave. Some texts assert it was hurled into a deep, lightless lake in Babylon, while chilling Islamic variants suggest it was dropped down a central, echoing cistern in the legendary city of brass, Iram of the Pillars. This mythical metropolis of immeasurable, glittering wealth sat isolated in the scorching sands of the Rub al-Khali desert. But the presence of this demon-filled vessel poisoned the very earth, its dark, vibrating energy slowly tainting the city's underground water supply. As the citizens drank from their corrupted wells, they were consumed by horrifying hallucinations and violent madness, ultimately leading to the total collapse and ghostly abandonment of the once great city. The cursed vessel remained hidden in those aquatic depths, acting as a profound, terrifying metaphor for the suppression of chaotic, unconscious forces buried deep beneath the calm, rational surface of the civilized world. The mythological trajectory of these 72 infernal spirits encompasses 3 distinct, tragic phases: their violent subjugation and forced labor constructing the first temple under the blinding seal of Solomon, their subsequent stifling imprisonment within the dark waters containing the brass vessel, and finally their catastrophic, inevitable release. This final apocalyptic phase was triggered not by an angry god, but by the greedy hands of men. Babylonian, or in some fragmented versions, Greek treasure seekers, driven by a lust for gold, began excavating the dead earth and discovered the sunken, heavy vessel. Believing this massive, sealed container to be overflowing with immense, unimaginable material wealth, these foolish men struck the metal with their heavy tools and forcefully broke open the ancient, secret seal. In a fraction of a heartbeat, they inadvertently released the 72 Goetic demons and their shrieking legions back into the breathing, mortal world. Like a plague of invisible locusts, the freed demons violently scattered, rushing back to their infernal abodes and dispersing their dark influence throughout the fragile human realm. This catastrophic breach served as a critical etiological myth, desperately explaining the enduring, suffocating presence of disease, madness, and bloody strife in human affairs, despite King Solomon's ancient, desperate purges. The brass vessel itself evolved into a potent, terrifying metaphor in the ceremonial magical tradition, representing the vulnerable magician's protective circle. To open the vessel is to risk absolute madness and immediate death, but to master its twisting contents is to command the very fabric of reality itself. The transition of this terrifying Solomonic legend from a whispered, apocryphal myth into a highly systematized, chillingly practical form of ritual magic did not happen overnight. It mutated over several centuries, drawing heavily from the blood-stained clay of Mesopotamian demon lists, the fragile, sun-bleached Greco-Egyptian magical papyri, and the heavy, leather-bound texts of medieval Europe. As early as the 1st century, the historian Flavius Josephus documented that the specific ancient methods of exorcism composed by the great king were still in active, desperate use by his contemporaries. He famously cited a bone-chilling incident where a man named Eleazar drew shrieking demons out of the possessed right in the magnificent presence of the Emperor Vespasian. Eleazar used a heavy iron ring containing a twisted magical root explicitly prescribed by Solomon, proving the terrifying, enduring, practical application of this dark lore. However, the shadow shifted from simple exorcism toward something far more dangerous in the High Middle Ages. The objective was no longer merely to cast demons out, but to deliberately summon, brutally interrogate, and bind them for personal, earthly gain. The earliest medieval grimoires, such as the 14th century Sworn Book of Honorius, established the suffocating structural blueprints for ritual purification, the drawing of the protective chalk circle, and the agonizing use of complex, vibrating seals. Though they initially focused on intense angelology and inducing direct, blinding visions of God. As the centuries dragged on, and the transmission of Arabic and Byzantine magical texts permeated the cold stone monasteries of Europe, the focus inevitably shifted toward darker occult cataloging, culminating in the definitive mid-17th century codification known as the Lemegeton, or the Lesser Key of Solomon. This massive, forbidden tome was a comprehensive, highly dangerous manual for the Renaissance magician, divided into 5 distinct, terrifying books. The most notorious section, the Ars Goetia, focused entirely on the suicidal evocation of the 72 evil spirits, once bound in the mythological brass vessel, detailing their exact seals, their noble ranks, and the precise, sulfur-scented rituals required to drag them into the triangle of art. But this highly specific catalog of 72 demons did not simply emerge from the void. It was the resulting amalgamation of centuries of frantic textual mutation, gross translation errors, and the deliberate, calculating synthesis of competing occult paradigms. A vital turning point was the publication of a text in 1577 by the Dutch physician Johann Weyer, who argued desperately against the fiery brutality of the witch hunts, claiming the accused were merely suffering from heavy melancholia. Yet paradoxically, Weyer included an appendix titled Pseudo-Monarchia Demonum, the false monarchy of demons, expanding an older roster to 69 entities and detailing their terrifying offices, the number of legions they commanded, and the exact ticking hours they could be safely conjured. However, terrified of what he had documented, Weyer deliberately omitted their magical sigils to prevent uninitiated, foolish readers from attempting the dangerous, mind-shattering rituals. Relying heavily on this text, the anonymous 17th-century compilers of the Ars Goetia made a crucial, mathematically precise alteration, expanding the list to exactly 72 spirits. This number was not drawn at random. It was a deliberate, geometric calculation designed to mathematically counterbalance the 72 angels of the Kabbalistic Shem HaMephorash, the explicit divided name of God, whose blinding celestial power was used by the conjurer as a protective, neutralizing force to choke and control the fallen entities. To reach this sacred number, they added 4 entirely new demons to the roster, including Vasago and Andromalius, forging the ultimate unbreakable catalog of hell. When you open the pages of the Ars Goetia, you do not find a chaotic, screaming horde of monsters, but rather a highly structured, suffocatingly strict bureaucracy that mirrors both the feudal noble structures of Renaissance Europe and the cold mechanical turning of the classical Ptolemaic astronomical system. Each of the 72 demons is assigned a specific, terrifying, noble title, which dictates their relative power within the burning pits of hell. The specific astrological timing required for their summoning, and the exact metallurgical composition of the heavy binding seal the practitioner was required to wear upon their beating chest to command absolute obedience. The hierarchy is completely rigid. Kings, representing the absolute pinnacle of infernal authority, are associated with the blinding light of the sun, and their seals must be crafted from pure, heavy gold. Marquises are bound by the cold light of the moon with seals of silver, while dukes are aligned with Venus, requiring seals forged of green, oxidized copper. Princes are governed by the massive gravity of Jupiter, with seals cast in tin. Presidents answer to Mercury through the fluid poison of quicksilver, and earls are tied to the aggressive, bloody energy of Mars, their seals constructed of cold iron. Standing alone at the bottom of the celestial ladder is the single knight, Phyrkos, associated with the slow, crushing death of Saturn, his seal made entirely of heavy, toxic lead. Yet, despite this rigid structure, the numbering of the demons within the text is notoriously, maddeningly inconsistent, appearing completely arbitrary, as if a stack of manuscript cards had been violently scrambled in a panic. This taxonomic chaos reflects the deeply composite nature of the grimoire itself, cobbled together from centuries of marginalia. But it is precisely this dense, esoteric bureaucracy that gave the Ars Goetia its enduring psychological power. By treating the infernal realm as a rational, navigable system governed by specific scientific rules of engagement, the trembling ceremonial magician asserted intellectual and spiritual dominance over the forces of absolute, screaming chaos. But as the modern era dawned, the interpretation of Solomonic magic underwent a radical, mind-bending transformation that completely shattered the ancient worldview. In 1904, the infamous occultist Aleister Crowley published an edited version of the text, fundamentally recontextualizing the bloody rituals. He argued forcefully that the evocation of these grotesque demons was not the literal summoning of external, objective entities from a physical, subterranean hell, but rather an advanced, terrifying system of deep psychological exploration. Within this brilliant synthesis of Western esotericism and early psychoanalysis, the Masonic concept of the secret vault, the Goetic legend of the brass vessel, and the physical architecture of Solomon's temple merge into one powerful, haunting psychological allegory. The temple is viewed not merely as a historical building of stone and cedar, but as a direct blueprint for the human psyche itself. The outer courtyards represent the physical flesh, the holy place represents the conscious, rational mind, and the hidden chambers and subterranean vaults, buried deep beneath, represent the dark, unmapped, terrifying regions of the human subconscious. In this psycho-spiritual interpretation, we are the architects. We bury our own psychological demons, our repressed traumas, our shadow traits, painful memories, and destructive violent impulses deep in the vaults of our subconscious mind. We believe they are safely sealed in a metaphorical brass vessel, when no one will see and no one will know. However, true spiritual alchemy requires walking down those dark stairs. To achieve true sovereignty over oneself, the modern magician must descend into the vault, break the seal of the vessel, and look those screaming shadow elements directly in the eyes. by calling them by their true names, understanding their dark mechanisms, and forcing them to obey the rational will. The practitioner binds these destructive traits to serve a higher, integrated purpose, transforming them from sources of madness into the very foundational stones used to build a perfected self. The exhausting lore of King Solomon's 72 demons represents one of the most resilient and complex narratives in human history, constantly adapting to resolve the eternal tension between divine sanctity and infernal utility. Ultimately, the dark occult secrets hidden within the architecture of the temple serve as a profound meditation on the nature of absolute power. To build the perfect sanctuary, whether a literal temple of stone and gold or the spiritual architecture of your own human soul, you cannot merely bask in the warm, comfortable light. You must possess the wisdom, the fortitude, and the sovereign authority to step into the darkness, call the shadows by their true names, and compel the monsters to carry the heaviest stones. We are always taught to eradicate our inner demons, to cast them out into the blinding light and pray for peace. But the terrifying irony of King Solomon's grand design is that the holiest place on earth, the very resting place of the divine presence, could not be completed by pious men or shining angels. It required the heavy, back-breaking lifting of actual monsters. The pristine, golden surface of our morality is entirely supported by the dark, chaotic forces we have ruthlessly bound and buried deep beneath the floorboards. We all have a secret subterranean vault inside our minds. You have one right now, a heavy brass vessel buried in the lightless depths of your subconscious, where you desperately lock away your rage, your deepest shames, and your unspoken traumas. We spend our entire lives terrified that the fragile seal will break, and these shadow traits will rise up to completely ruin us. But true spiritual alchemy reveals that Solomon did not simply banish the darkness, he put it to work. True psychological mastery is not pretending your demons do not exist. It is walking down the cold stone steps into the vault, looking your deepest flaws in the eyes, calling them by their true names, and forcing them to build your personal empire. So when you finally stand before the iron gates of your own mind, what will you do? Do you choose to be the terrified, fragile warden of your own brass vessel, forever hiding from the dark? Or do you become the occult architect, intentionally shattering the seal to make your monsters carry the heaviest stones? But remember, opening that ancient vault is only the beginning of a much darker journey. Once the seal is broken, you must be prepared to face what comes next, an ancient cosmic rebellion far older than humanity itself. To survive the unleashing of the primeval world rulers and witness the true, horrifying origin of the entities that still haunt the shadows of our modern reality, you must join us in the dark. Subscribe and keep your eyes open, because the next chapter will drag you directly into the burning heart of the forgotten abyss.